afternoon, good evening. I think California is morning. Brazil is starting to be lunchtime and afternoon. My name is Pedro Mora, and I'll be the moderator of the session today. I am very excited to have here Rodrigo Xavier and Clark Kellogg, uniting different ecosystems and people with amazing experience around innovation and scaling impact. I am the co-founder of Flourish Savings, an organization on a mission to help individuals better take care of their money. In the US, we are a direct-to-consumer app. In Brazil, we actually license our technology to banks. And here I'm with two people that have been key to the beginnings and the early days of Flourish. And now that we start to scale, they have played very substantial role. But before we get started, I actually wanted to take over to Rodrigo and Clark for a quick introduction, how they ended up to be here, and paint a quick picture to the folks in the Northeast who you are and why you decided to join this conversation today.
Thank you very much, Pedro. I'll let Clark go first.
And I was hoping you would do that and go first, Rodrigo. Okay, well, good morning or good afternoon or evening, as Pedro said, to all of you, and thanks for joining. I live in Berkeley, California. I am a professor at the University of California. I'm an architect by original training from the University of California. My passion around innovation is born of my lifelong orientation to design. And I learned about 40 years ago that design was useful well beyond designing buildings. And so began the process of helping to lay the track for design thinking and its corollary innovation. I'll leave it right there for now. I will, I'm sure, fill in blanks as we go.
Okay,
Rodrigo.
Thank you very much, Clark, and thank you, Pedro. Hello, everybody. My name is Rodrigo Xavier. I'm actually currently living in São Paulo. Anyways, in terms of my background, I'm married. I'm a father of 3 daughters. I was born in Brasília in the late 1960s, son of 2 teachers who always emphasized the importance of education at home. So I always took education very seriously in my life. In terms of my background, I have an economics degree from Universidade de Brasília, UNB. I have a postgraduate in international economics from University of Fukushima, Japan, and an MBA from the Thunderbird Global School of Management in Arizona. My background is mostly on the financial sector. I worked for 25 years in the financial markets, 17 years at a bank called Banco Pactual, that's now called BTG Pactual, and then 5 years at an asset management firm that I founded called Vinci Partners, and 3 years at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Brazil. 3 years ago, I decided to understand better the so-called 4.0 industrial revolution and moved with my family to Silicon Valley. I became a fellow at Stanford University and immersed myself in the topics of innovation, technology, entrepreneurship, which have become a passion of mine. Then about a year ago, I returned to Brazil with a dream of somehow giving back to our country and to society in general. A society has been overly generous to me, and that's the reason I'm here. I really love stories as Flourish and Pedro's story, so I'm very honored to be part of this panel with Clark. Thank you.
This is very, very exciting. And I think as we start, today the conversation will be around leadership, impact, innovation, and through the lenses of individuals that have lived the ecosystem from different ways. Perhaps Rodrigo from a very large corporation from the financial service sector, today has angel investor, has ecosystem builder. Clark coming from the background of a architect, professor, consultant, trainer of innovation and empowering individuals. So I'm very excited to have this conversation here today and go through some of the topics of how do individuals like Clark and Rodrigo think about the ecosystem and how they bridge the gap between different cultures where they have both lived, studied, but they also started very similar to most of you there. Rodrigo specifically started in Brasília. Clark started in Fresno, in a small town in California. So I'm very excited to learn a little bit more about their career decisions and how they got to be here. So, Rodrigo, the first question to you. You started in Brasilia, as you mentioned. You decided to study in Japan. You also spent some time in Arizona. Can you share a little bit about your own decisions and how you first started to go abroad, how you opened those opportunities?
Sure. Thank you very much, Pedro. Now, listen, since I was very young, I was always intrigued with the fact that although being such a wonderful and rich country, right, in terms of natural resource, Brazil was such a poor and very, let's say, unequal country in economic terms. And I wanted to learn from other countries, especially developed ones, what was sort of the secret for their success. And therefore, I studied a lot about this. And when the opportunity came for me to go to Japan with a full scholarship from the Japanese ministry, I embraced immediately. I mean, Japan for me was a very intriguing story in many ways, right? How come like a country that was actually so small in geographic terms, no natural resources whatsoever. Country had been devastated by a war that had just finished approximately 40 years before I started thinking about it, had become one of the leading economies of the world, right? On that time in the 80s, right? I mean, the economists were actually forecast that Japan would surpass the US as the #1 GDP in the world in the next 20 years, similar to what we see in China right now. And I said, oh my gosh, I have to learn from these guys. So I embraced it immediately, and I would say that, of course, I learned a lot from my Japanese experience. But what I think in terms of this conversation, what I think is worthwhile mentioning is some of the sort of the macro characteristic that it actually has given me. I went to Japan at a time where the world was definitely not as global as it is today. I went to a place that hardly anybody spoke English. So it was a kind of a very bold movement, I'd say, on my side. And that's it. I think what I learned from Japan is first of all, I eliminated that inferiority complex that we Brazilians used to have for a long time, that everything that comes from abroad, everything that's non-Brazilian is better than we are. By going to Japan and studying with people from all over the world, I really saw that I was no different. I was not smarter or less smart than some of my colleagues. So it gave me a huge sense of, let's say, of self-confidence. It certainly gave me the incentive to be curious, to be bold, to be brave, to be multicultural. So definitely, when I look at them, and of course, then I went to the US and I started an international career, I would say that, it taught me a lot, but especially soft skills that are very used and have been very used throughout my whole career.
That's great. And it's interesting to hear that the education itself is the point that led you there, but hearing that, look, at the end of the day, it was the experience of how I found myself in the ecosystem and how I see myself as a leader in this broader context, and specifically this notion of confidence. Really interesting to hear that, Rodrigo. Clark, kind of like a similar question, but maybe putting the lenses of you, a professor at the university, you see many people from all over the world coming in to study, to want to make a difference. They come with potential, already experiences, but through the university, they see this big connection of university, ecosystem, startups, big corporation. So could you share from your lenses, in your own experience, how do you see that journey of education and the connected ecosystem?
Thank you. I'll begin by reaching back to something Rodrigo said, which has been very important in my life as well as the life of the students that you mentioned, Pedro. And that is the university allows us to believe more in ourselves. And I say that on a very personal level, and I mean it also on a very collective level among students. So on the personal level, you mentioned I came from a small agricultural town in California, and it is amazing to me, even at 69 years old, when I wake up each day and think, my gosh, look at this life, because I never could have imagined it as a child. And the thing that has fueled, and I'm talking about me as a student right now, when I was in university in a different role, the fuel there is really the acknowledgement from the environment that one is in that we do have skills, we do have talent, we do have vision, and we do have power. And there's no other, generally, there's no other force in a young person's life that confirms those ideas. Now, I want to just spend a moment on that. I don't know the history, certainly, of everyone listening today, but I was the first person in my family to go to college, so there was no learning curve that I came to it with. And so it was, as Rodrigo said, a journey of discovery. Now, taking that framework and putting it onto the current experience of students like you, Pedro, at university, we are able to do some of the same things. You come into an environment where people believe in you, where your talents and skills are recognized and built upon, and you do this in the context of a large network of other students who become your lifelong friends. And I want to emphasize that in just the few more moments I want to spend answering your question, that network of people you have in university, and in the case of living here in the Silicon Valley area, connection to the people in those innovation and tech industries is so powerful. For example, in my consulting firm that I founded with a former student at Haas, we always know who to call when we need either technical help or project help, because we go to the big, vast network of UC Berkeley Haas MBA students or other engineering talent, wherever it might be. This network effect is the intense power of being able to leverage your skills and abilities with the people that you know and trust, and you have contact with through your networks. And so the importance of relationship, the importance of what we now call network, cannot be overstressed. The one piece of, I guess, advice I would share with our listeners today is that those networks begin right now and they last forever. So many of our students say that the best thing that happened to them in school is the people that they met.
That's it. I would add, with running the risk of the moderator talking, but both of you, if it was not positioning myself and building the network, we would not be here having this conversation today, right? Rodrigo came to speak at the University of Berkeley. We ended up having a few conversations and somehow ended up staying connected, seeking ways to add value. Clark, I have personally taken your design thinking class, and even through when the pandemic started and we were like, will we survive as a startup? We continue to go back and nurture those relationships. And often we see coming together in the path and not perhaps nurturing or not necessarily thinking that we belong or we are one of the individuals part of that network. And building on that similar conversation, I wanted to kind of dive the conversation to networks are created and built differently, so are ecosystems. And Rodrigo, you grew up in Brazil. Clark, you grew up in California, but you both have done work around the world. And specifically, the question is, could you compare and contrast the ecosystems that you see, perhaps a very well developed within California, a more emerging ecosystem in Brazil, and then even for the audience here today, we're not talking about the ecosystem of São Paulo. We are talking about the ecosystem of Northeast Brazil that's even younger within itself. So the question is, could you compare and contrast, but put the lenses of opportunities for an entrepreneur or someone who wants to be an entrepreneur?
Sure. Well, listen, when we compare, let's say, the innovation technology ecosystem, right, of Brazil, of course, São Paulo, the Northeast, of course, as we have some, let's say, some different areas in our own country, right? But when we compare this to, let's say, to Silicon Valley and other important tech ecosystems in the world, such as Israel and in China nowadays, right, which has become a major player and a major hub, we cannot think other thing, but think, listen, Brazil's way behind, okay? We still have, as you say, hopefully we are emerging, but we still have definitely a long ways to go, and we can discuss here a lot of reasons why this is actually happening, why this has happened. But one of, might say, my personal analysis on this front, Pedro, is that I do have a sense that in Brazil, we spend too much time dealing and nurturing our past, right? I mean, instead of really focusing on building our future, and that for me became very clear when I went to Silicon Valley and I saw everybody, let's say, how can we do this in the future? How can we solve this problem? How can we the energy that we actually in Brazil spend discussing the problems and the unfortunate events of our past for me, it is a very sad thing, and that we have to try to overcome this. As we have been studying and learning, this world now is not linear anymore. It's definitely an exponential world, and the more that we think, the more time that we spend actually thinking about the past, is less time that we have to think about the future and to close this gap with countries that are doing way much better than we are. And that's why one of my, let's say, of my agendas, ever since I lived in Silicon Valley and came back to Brazil, I call myself a converted dinosaur. I was a guy that was kind of traditional, and all of a sudden, I opened myself to this new 4.0 world and modern world, and I've kind of become a prophet of, of how important it is, for us to really engage ourselves well in this agenda and spend the necessary time, energy, education into building a better future for ourselves. And my takes, like, if we don't, really focus on innovation, on technology, on entrepreneurship, and how all these things get together, we're going to be falling even more behind. The good news, though, in the last years, I've seen that this is waking up. It's starting to happen. I moved back to São Paulo a year ago, and I see a different city and a different ecosystem there. I think people are even the government is giving more, time and more focus on this. I'm definitely convinced that it's exactly through innovation, technology, entrepreneurship that we find our most, the solutions for our most important challenges. So that's why when you invited me to participate in this panel, I said, listen, and I know in the audience of this panel that basically consists of entrepreneurs, of students, of the architects, and using, of course, Clark's own sort of professional, the architects of the future. This couldn't be a better place for me to be talking and to be sort of sending my new world message, right? Which is like, we have to stop, digesting and spending so much energy in figuring out what we did wrong in the past and just, crying out. We have to hands-on build a new future, which can only be built if you really engage well in these themes that this conference here is actually talking about. Thank you. Up to you, Clark. Sorry for talking so much.
Not at all. I'm so intrigued by many of the things you said, nurturing the past and not the future. That's a theme that in the US right now, we are spending a lot of time looking at our racial past and the injustices of enslaved people. And bringing that right up into the present, we're worried about the upcoming election and the suppression of voting, particularly of the people that have been disadvantaged in the history of our nation. And so that focus on wallowing in the past versus productively using it to build a future, I think is particularly relevant right now, at least in the nation that I'm living in. And I think that another point I'd like to make about the mindset of innovation, which you both of you so embody, is that it's very helpful when innovation is one's native language. And by that, I mean, if you grow up in a culture and in a region, geographic region, where innovation is an accepted part of daily life, it is a very different pathway to that innovative mindset than if you speak it as a second language. And I think about this a lot with respect to my non-grasp of Portuguese. You don't want me to be speaking Portuguese because it is such a non-native language to me. Same with innovation. When we are immersed in it as a way of life, we trust it a lot more than when we are learning it as a, quote, second language. And that's important, because to be creatively embracing new things, innovating, you really have to believe it. And we have a saying in our design thinking practice and our innovation training at UC Berkeley that is, we always say, trust the process, do the work. And I really emphasize the trust piece, because innovating, creating new things, building a future are things that, they don't exist yet. And we have to be bold, confident innovators, because if we don't believe it, how can I ask you to believe it? How can I ask you to come with me on the dream of innovating a new product, a new service, a new institution? It's an invalid ask if we don't believe it ourselves. And I want to add just one more point to this answer. In the US and perhaps in Brazil, we are at an historic level of mistrust of our institutions. And this has happened at 3 other times in the United States history. One was our Civil War. The next was the Great Depression of the 20s. And the third one, preceding now, was the tumult of the 60s revolution, counterculture revolution of opposing the Vietnam War and the status quo in this nation. We are now in another such era, the 4th in the history of this country. And what's interesting about these events, if you look at the history, is that as the institutions essentially decay, what comes to fill their place? Innovation, new ideas, new institutions rise up and take their place as foundations of the society, as foundations in the business world, as foundations in social service. And a vast new ecosystem of ideas is emerging in the US right now because of the troubles that we're facing, because of the instability. So it is innovation, it is new thinking that's rising up to recreate the institutions that are now starting to decay. And we are in the US fervently engaged in this effort to make democracy whole. And that's a whole other conversation that I won't lead us into right now, but it's an exciting time to be an innovator, because we are called upon to bring all we have to the table and help society transform itself.
That's perfect. That's great.
I hear what you guys are saying, perhaps from 2 different angles, but there's just the idea and concept of dwelling on the past or creating the future that you want to live in, or said in other words, being the victim of the situation, or being the crazy person who's out there and choosing to design the society, the path, the ecosystem around you.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. And the time that we live, Clark, you started talking about this. Rodrigo, you and I had some conversations around this. The elephant in the room, right? Or no longer the elephant in the room. We live in a pandemic. Things are changing very, very quickly. As you personally reflect on the changes that you made during the pandemic to adapt, change your work, could you share with folks a little bit more about Rodrigo and Clark at the personal level or the work level, the things that you had to change in the last couple of months and adapt to the current situation?
Ooh. I mean, in my case, right, Pedro, I mean, as I've been pretty much still on my own soul search, like figuring out what to do and still researching and study and.
Wait, you mean that never ends? Like you.
That's right. I mean, I look at I honestly, don't see much of a drastic routine change, except that, of course, I'm not meeting in person anymore, or I'm not in an office. But when I look at my analysis of this, pandemic, and what I find maybe interesting, maybe to share here, is that Although, of course, I mean, it's a very sad and, and harsh, situation we are living at. But if I can figure out, as everything in our lives, right? I mean, the positives and the negatives, the half cup full and half cup empty. When I look at a positive aspect of this sad crisis we are living at, is that I think has really opened the eyes of a lot of people for the depth and the speed of this so-called revolution. When I look at my father, who's 84 years old, who had not much contact with technology, now he's ordering food, through his cell phone. He's Zooming, as the only way for us to get together is either through Zoom or through WebEx, whatever, through one of these, technology enablers there. I really, again, as a prophet of this, be prepared, the revolution is coming, the new world is coming. I see this as actually a very live and good example, that we have to be prepared of this message. And I mean that, things have accelerated a lot. What we thought was going to happen maybe in 5-10 years, it's happening right now. So, and that's a great time for entrepreneurs. That's a great time for innovators. That's a great time for people that think outside of the box, to come up with ideas, to come up with businesses that are going to be game changers and are going to be successful stories in the future. So when I look at what's happening right now, and again, especially using our country, Brazil's lens, which in my view was kind of way behind, the most, let's say, mature and exciting ecosystems of innovation technology around the world. I think, and again, as a venture capital investor, I see a lot of exciting things happening. A lot of, there has been kind of a push that a lot of people needed to really get out of their comfort zone and to start being creative and to start innovating. And again, and my own view is that this is going to be what's going to save us, what's going to help us, exactly this change of mindset, this change of mentality, this arisal of new business people, of a new way to do business. And again, I think the pandemic has just really, emphasized this message. And hopefully too, it has also brought, the fact that, that we only learn, through harsh times, that what is really important to us when we see some of our loved ones going through difficult times and some loved ones losing their lives because of, it really brings us more together as a country. And again, as Clark said, we also live in this kind of, polarization period here in Brazil as well. So there's a lot of similarities between Brazil and the US. But at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that we're going to emerge out of this with more solidarity, with more generosity, with more, let's say, unity as a country, and hopefully, as an optimistic, I'm hoping for better times out of this.
That's great, and it's great to hear elements around your priorities and priorities of people, and even the silver lining or the opportunity throughout this, right? And choosing to put lenses of optimism. Clark, you want to share a little bit of how you have evolved and changed?
Well, I'll begin by echoing the inspiring words, Rodrigo, that you shared, which I just line up with and agree with. It's such an interesting period because we don't really have the choice but to change and adapt in such extreme circumstances. And so the resistance to change has in many cases been lowered because we don't have any other choice. Now that's a funny way to get to innovation, but it is the way we've gotten there. In our consulting firm, between March 1st and April 1st, we had 9 projects canceled or delayed. And so we had no business. And my business partner and I sat down on Zoom and said, well, what can we do? What can we give away? How might we help? And it wasn't really an altruistic question. It was more about, what are we going to do? And what has come of that is the most amazing set of design sprints based on issues brought up by the pandemic around social isolation of elders, around frontline healthcare workers, and around racial justice. And we are now involved in some of the most the most powerful work of my long career, again, because of the pandemic. And there's one idea I'll quickly share with you, and it's a principle of innovation, and it is around how we design new things. And our principle is design at the extreme and test at the mean. And what that stands for is in finding new products, services, institutions, etc., we look at the very extreme case, the hardest case, the spots at the end of that bell curve where we can see things really clearly. Once we are able to isolate an issue at that extreme and solve it, we then can bring that solution back to the big middle and test it. And 9 out of 10 times, we find that the solution that's designed for an extreme user is actually a very good solution for everyone. And so that's where we have gone during the pandemic, is to those extreme need cases and convened groups of our network to work along with us in design sprints to come up with new ideas, new solutions that will last beyond the pandemic. A quick example is the isolated elder having to jump onto technology to stay in touch with their families. But who knows how to do all of this if you're like your father, Rodrigo? One thing that's come out of it is a little card reader that affixes to the back of a device. And we've created little cards with people's photograph on them and their name. And you simply slide that card into the reader that has been prototyped, and it instantly dials up the person whose photograph it is on whatever channel is the one that's been established. And this has been tested in Sweden, and it's just a resounding success. So imagine when the pandemic is over, all the uses for an extreme solution like that in daily life. And kids use it, I'll use it, right? I can just slide the Rodrigo card in and suddenly here we are talking. So that's just one example of the kinds of things that are available to us that we would never have been engaged in the past. And the other part, the last part I'll mention is Rodrigo framed in the optimism of this time, which I echo. And partly it is because to not be optimistic, it feels like giving up right now. And the world is so profoundly a good place. We can't decrease our hope. We have to increase our action to bring innovation to bear on the complex and difficult things we're facing. But without it, we know the outcome. With it, maybe we can bend the curve and turn out better off.
Perfect. That's incredible. Listening to both of you, there is this continuous way of choosing to see the world and choosing to design the world you want to live in, and seeing things as opportunities to be creative for the values that you want to live in the world. And that's really inspiring and powerful for myself and hope for others that are listening. Shifting the conversation to ecosystem. You both play in the ecosystem today. You have very successful careers and you play in the ecosystem different roles. And you both are mentors, you both are coaches, you both are continue to be entrepreneur and reinventing yourselves no matter where you are in the journey of your career. But more specifically, Clark, I wanted you to reflect on, you've seen a lot of ideas. You've seen a lot of ideas that have not worked. You've seen a lot of people try new things. I want you to share some of the thoughts of people that have successfully brought innovation to market or new products or successful business. Mm-hmm. What do they have in common?
Failure.
Tell me more. What does that mean?
Yeah, I'll expand on that just a little bit. But I know that all three of us are grinning at that, because behind every successful innovation that reaches the public are a trail of probably a dozen failures that got you there. And you know, we laugh about this in our innovation work, that we have lots of ideas all the time, and you know, the vast majority of them aren't any good, but we're looking for that one or two out of 100 that are good. And so the real experience of this is perseverance, through the learning cycle of failure. So failure is only a failure if you don't learn anything. And it's really so much of what we do in process terms, or we find lots of ideas that don't work. And every so often we find one that does. And that's what inspires us to keep going. The other last part of that, Pedro, is that failure isn't a negative mark on my life. It's just a thing that didn't work. That's a mindset realization. And when I was younger, I really took it very personally. If that didn't work, I must be a lousy human. And quite honestly, it took me 20 years of doing work in the field to kind of get over that, get over myself, get my ego out of the way of that, because it's really not about me. It's just about how we do the work. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and if I could, Pedro, just comment on Clark's great testimony there. I mean, that's something that we have to work this much better in Brazil, right? In Brazil, we're still under the position of the view that if we fail, that's it. Brazilians are very, let's say, afraid of failing. They believe that once they fail, they don't have a second chance, that failing is bad, that we should be ashamed. And that, on the other hand, is exactly, I look at myself as well. And by the way, I still have problems to deal with failure up until today. Even, it's a normal human thing, right? But honestly, when I look back, was exactly the times that I didn't do well, that I failed, that I learned the most, that I built some of my soft skills the best, of being resilient, of being, so that's definitely something that, going back to your questions on ecosystems, that I still see a major difference. Like in California, I remember when I was there, by talking to some of the young people that are mentoring there, they were actually proud to talk about their failures. It was actually almost like, if they didn't fail, they were not going to build something successful. So they started talking about their failures, not what they actually did well. Here in Brazil is exactly the opposite, still today. People are very ashamed of talking about their failures, of failing. And I think that's definitely something that we have to change in order to build, let's say, a more sustainable and successful ecosystem, and therefore a country and society.
Yeah, let me allow to do this by pushing back a little bit in both of you, because when you first hear concepts like this, you're like, yes, it sounds great, but it's human to protect yourself, right? Like, you don't want to say that you failed. And even though you reflect back, you hear successful people, they hear this, it sounds like a story so far attached from you, right? Like, oh, they fail and they learn. Even like, if you look back at your own journey or your own coaching of others, what words of advice you have to either embracing that or dealing or coping with that feeling? Because wanting or not, failure is not natural that you're proud of, right?
Well, at the risk of delivering a really bad graduation speech, I think so much of what you're asking, Pedro, is rooted in our self-esteem and our confidence and our experience. And as a 20-year-old architecture student, I was so routinely criticized in our critique of our design work that it really hurt me deeply. And it took me probably 10 years to actually heal from that experience, because I was confused about the value of the work and the value of the me. And so I would say to anyone who cares to listen that really deeply understand, and you just have to take this on faith at the moment, depending on how old you are, understand that the work is not the person. And the failure is not, as Rodrigo said, it's not a mark on your life's value. It's just an event, and you learn from it and you go forward. And that kind of confidence in one's own ability is easy to talk about. That's the bad graduation speech piece. But all I can tell you is even a bad graduation speech is often true. So it would be to believe in your own abilities. And every great entrepreneur is an idiot until they're successful, and then they're a genius. But the person is the same person. So live into that idea that we don't need a lot of external validation if we believe in the ideas we're working on. We do have to work collectively. No innovation is a single person, it's a team. And nothing happens without the support of that ecosystem we've been talking about. Is that a cheesy enough graduation speech? But it is actually all very true.
You personally made me reflect about things of this idea of, by the way, I wouldn't say it's cheesy. It made me reflect of, it's the process and detaching the individual, right? Which often can be hard. To get innovation is, how do you put yourself out there, but believe on the process of what it's being created that's bigger than yourself. And the failure can be framed as learnings, or the failure can be moving forward to a next phase that did not work, and that's not the direction I will go, versus continue to beat yourself in the head because you said you would do certain thing and you're not willing to adapt and change.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is quite incredible to reflect on and talk through this. Rodrigo, did you want to add something there?
No, I think that's it, Pedro. I mean, again, for me, when I look back, and that's why I tell the people that actually have a patient enough that want to talk to me, is I give them my own testimony that, I mean, it's definitely true that the times that I learned the most was exactly at times of failure. I mean, and I also think about, listen, if you're afraid of failing, this means that you're probably not going to be a bold and courageous person, because you're always going to be afraid of failing. Therefore, you're not going to go ahead. And of course, alongside with, courage, being bold, being resilient, being, that's exactly, the main characteristics of a good entrepreneur, right? So sometimes, by being afraid of failing is going to also end up impacting other very important characteristics for you to be a successful entrepreneur, a successful, let's say, human being.
Yeah. Building on that, Rodrigo, when you look at this and you take into your eyes of now investing in startups, projects, concepts, people, can you share a little bit about how, what is usually your thesis around angel investment or VC investment? And then more specifically, how do you make the decision in investing in a project or a team?
Yeah, so try to be very briefly there, but I mean, so venture capital has become something, a passion of mine, and because of everything that we actually said here, something that I really want to be focused at, okay? And I'm currently a partner of a venture capital firm called IGA Ventures, in which we actually are looking mostly Series A, but we also do angel like early stage as well, a little bit of Series B. And first of all, I mean, the way that I look at venture capital, in a very simplistic way, is that I'm looking for solutions for, I mean, when you look at the world, there's so much, inefficiency, so much bureaucracy, so much, let's say, waste, right? So I'm actually looking for solutions that actually are going to make this business or this area or this problem, or is going to solve a problem less, more efficient. It's going to waste less. So I try usually to look at big idea, big problems, and exactly what are the solutions that people are looking into that area. Okay, so it's very simplistic way. Say with efficiency, innovation, technology, I mean, there should be a better way to be dealing with this problem. That's why I find Brazil an extremely rich country in terms of opportunities, because we have so much inefficiency, we have so much bureaucracy, we have so much waste, right? Of money, of efforts, of energy, of bad systems. So I'm very optimistic and bullish, okay, on the opportunity to invest in venture capital here in Brazil. Going straight to your question, Pedro, I mean, again, and being very simplistic here for time constraints, I basically look into two things when I'm making an investment, okay, in general. First of all, the team, the people. I mean, for me, I mean, who is behind that idea of that company? Are the people, let's say, passionate? Are they resilient? Are they perseverant? Are they humble? Because, sometimes people may actually think that if you're humble, you're not self-confident. For me, no, you can be extremely self-confident, but still be humble. And one of the things that I personally despise the most is like cocky people, people that think they're way better than everybody else. I've seen a lot of very cocky people doing great jobs, and but usually I try to stay away from them because I really like to be dealing and to be, learning and to be, close to the people. So are they bold? So first of all is, who is this team? Are they well prepared? Are they hard workers? So I spend a lot of time analyzing who I'm dealing with, who I'm investing in, who is behind, what are the principles, their values, and so on, okay? And then the second one, and as important as, is exactly what I mentioned. What is the idea that this person, this company is trying to solve, or that problem? What is the mission of that company? Is it a solution, let's say a better way for relevant problems? Does it have an edge, right? Is it something that is, something that is very easily copyable? I'm not going to be investing in that. It doesn't make sense. And of course, if I love the person, usually what I do, listen, I think you have everything to be doing a successful company investment, but I think your idea is not something that you should be working on because, somebody can come here and copycat in one day, and it's not going to be, So I'd say that, again, it's very simplistic and summarized way. I look at the combination of, a great idea and a great mission together with who's behind the execution of that idea or that mission, so the mission and the person, people.
That's incredible to hear. And as you think about putting the lenses of Brazil, we definitely have amazing talent. We have lots of inefficiency. Now, do we have the vehicles to get there, right? And you often hear gaps of what investors are looking for and what entrepreneurs are at. There's usually a big gap of, are we there? Do we understand the same way? And a couple of things that resonated here is like size of the market. Are they really solving a problem? And then deeper is like, how motivated is the person? And you brought this third element of concept, which at the University of Berkeley, they call confidence without attitude, is like, are you a leader that put yourself out there and know what you're talking about, but you're humble in the way that you do it, and you're willing to learn and evolve and change as the world change.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. Because once you're humble, the concept of failure becomes very, okay, are you humble enough to accept your failures, or you're so cocky that you're so self-confident in a negative way that you're going to be a stubborn, person that's going to go and lead that company to the end and the death, because you're not going to recognize that you did something wrong, and therefore. So yeah, I like the way they said at Berkeley. Look, confident, but with the right attitude.
That's right. Clark, you want to add a couple things related to that, and maybe put in the lenses of projects you choose to invest, because time is finite, right? As you choose projects, concepts that you work on, what is it that you look for when you devote time either to mentoring teams, investing time, supporting ideas, concepts?
Rodrigo's criteria is constant in my life as well. We're not investing money. We're investing human capital, our time and our mentoring and our enthusiasm and our networks. But we make it on the same decision criteria. I'm at a spot in my life and career when I'm a little more selective than I certainly was when I was younger, partly because I don't have a lot of time left to work on all kinds of just anything that rolls in. So we're working on things that we believe matter to humans. This will, again, somewhat cliched perhaps, but will this make the world a better place? And if it will, then it's worthy. Particularly if it meets the other criteria that Rodrigo mentioned. Is it have a high likelihood of success? Is it solving a real problem, and who's working on it? I guess the last thought I would contribute to our conversation this morning, or today, is that I like to think this way: don't worry, just work. And working on something just solves so many of the worry problems. It is also taking action, which is a real problem when people are overwhelmed. We tend to freeze. We tend to do nothing. So doing anything, working and not worrying, for me, has always been a way to both improve my own performance, but also my own mood, my own sense of, am I able to contribute something positive? And that's really important, to contribute positively, individually, for our own sense of worth, and also to our communities.
Oh, amazing. This conversation can go on for a lot longer. However, we are getting at time here, and I wanted to do a couple of things in the last few minutes we are all together. One, allow this message of hope, positivity, the way you see the world and your own self-confidence that you can impact, really drive some of the highlights of the conversation today. I also wanted to flip back to you folks. You have an audience of young, driven students, entrepreneurs, individuals who want to get ideas out of the paper and may at times feel like they may not be in the right ecosystem, they may not have the right resources. But as we saw today, you all have come from backgrounds that are not necessarily full of access from day one. Yes, we have our own privileges of location where we have been, but you all built an amazing career. If you were to give yourself advice, you're back on the early 20s, to say, Rodrigo back in the 20s, Clark back in the 20s, what would you like to have said to Rodrigo and Clark at that time?
Ooh. You want to start with that, Clark, so I can think more?
I was hoping you were going to take that one, Rodrigo. Yeah, all right. Well, I'll give it a shot, and then you can clean it up, Rodrigo, after when I'm done.
Okay.
I think Pedro, thanks for asking the tough question here. I think I would say that when I look back over the long arc of career and life, what are the things that have really made a difference? And the things that have made a difference have been many of the things we've talked about: relationships, doing good in the world, trusting ourselves, trusting other people, and continuously working hard. And I think this idea of humility that Rodrigo mentioned is essential, because people that come from modest beginnings work hard. And I've always considered it one of my greatest secret tools, that I really had to work for everything. And this isn't a woe is me comment. It is, what a beautiful gift I was given by the world, that I had to work hard to achieve things, because it's given me a great sense of purpose. It has inspired my children and my grandchildren and the people I'm fortunate enough to work with. And it's fun. So I think purpose and working hard is the thing I would say to myself if I were to look back today.
Oh, perfect. No, of course, I subscribe to what you just said. This is great. I would probably, when I was thinking of this answer here, I'd probably say a few things to myself. First of all, don't be afraid of failing, which you already discussed here, because I was, and still am in many ways, afraid of failing. And again, when I look back, I see a lot of great things through the lens of failure, which have made me, I think, a better person. Don't be afraid of asking for help. Sometimes, that comes with humility too, right? Sometimes you're too afraid of, if you ask for help, this is going to show weaknesses on you. That, and the more that I think about, even for people that I've asked for help and have not helped me, whatever, but most people that I did ask for help have helped me and have played a very important role in my life. And I think, again, it is, at the end of the day, it is a collective effort here going through life. And the more that you share, the more that you give, the more that you receive. So, and that's it. Of course, being generous, not because you expect something in exchange, but, the truth is, it always comes. The more generous you are, the more you're going to receive back. Not that you should be doing this because you want to receive back, but be as generous as possible. Choose well who you want to spend time with or become a partner. I maybe look back in my past. Maybe I spend a little bit more time than I should with some people that, not that they're worse or better than I am, but just did not add too much on me and just gave me some bad energy in many ways. So I think people that have the same values, same principles that are complementary to you are usually the best people that you should be hanging with. Another thing that I would tell myself: listen, be on the driver's seat of your life. You know, do not wait for others to do, you know, what you should be doing for yourself. You know, and a lot of times we expect others to find the solutions or to make the difficult decisions in our lives that we need to, and it's usually a sign of that's not good. You know, usually when you are the one driving your life, driving your destiny, that's when I think, you know, I see fulfillment. And as far as I guess an overall, I mean, in line with what you said about purpose, right? I totally agree with that. Have a purpose in life. Understanding well your ideas, yourself, and your mission in life. Only when you understand this well is that, again, you're going to fulfill your own desire and your own happiness in life. So purpose is something that's extremely important. Make sure that there is purpose in everything or most things that you do. This would be my 2 cents.
This is, besides allowing to sink in and allow us to reflect on this, this has been an incredible conversation for myself, learning through and having you reflect on your own journey. I leave with a couple of things of how do you see the world around you? How do you, using your words, Rodrigo, you are in the driver's seat of your decision. And Clark, knowing that there will continue to be uncertainty, and you guys haven't clearly said that with those words, but it's almost this concept of this purpose, have it, but it continues. Like you continue to find it based on the circumstances, evolving and adapt. So thank you very much for the conversation today around innovation, ecosystems, but more than anything, your own personal leadership story. I really appreciate you sharing with us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very
Thank you very much, Clark. Thank you very much, Pedro. And thank you very much for listening to us, guys.
Yes.